By far the biggest conspiracy in NBA history is Klutch Sports and their influence on the mainstream sports media. And for years people have speculated with no proof that Klutch Sports, their ties to ESPN, Fox Sports, they run pretty deep. And they'll send out memos, talking points to certain analysts they handpick to push their narrative and their agenda.
Nobody, no star in the history of sports has gone about the business of methodically, systematically, continuously trying to control the narrative. And I have proof.
I was actually shocked that I got a text or an email from the Klutch agency that was promoting LeBron James for MVP.
And looking at ESPN specifically, the most influential LeBron fan they have, the most influential Klutch asset they have, is of course Shannon Sharpe. And looking at this year's NBA playoffs, one of Shannon's favorite players he's boosting out the most is Jalen Brunson. And in Shannon's own words, Brunson this year is carrying the Knicks.
This is Allen Iverson all over again. But what Jalen Brunson is doing, the consecutive 40-point games, doing it game in and game out, and when they have to have it, because if you really look at it, Karl-Anthony Towns, we've seen Karl-Anthony Towns go get you 60 points in a ball game. It's Jalen Brunson or bust.
Now, no doubt Brunson is carrying them, averaging 35 points, 8 assists, 4 boards on 46% shooting. And before Game 2 versus the Pacers, it had 4 straight games of 40-plus points, the longest streak since Jordan in 1993. And as it currently stands, Brunson is only one of 2 players ever to average 35 points, 8 assists through 2 rounds of the playoffs since Michael Jordan in 1989. Now you might say, what does Jalen Brunson have to do with a Klutch Sports narrative? So let me explain it. Brunson's stats him carrying the Knicks, eerily similar to Michael Jordan in 1989. But here's the problem. Someone like Shannon Sharpe with Brunson will give him props, say he's carrying the Knicks, rightfully so. But when it comes to Michael Jordan doing the exact same thing, what's the narrative?
You keep talking about how great he was, but how great was he without Scottie Pippen? Just a guy that put up a lot of stats. He was probably Russell Westbrook before Russell was, because that's all he did was accumulate stats. And even when he got Scottie Pippen, lost to the Pistons 3 straight times. 3.
And here's the thing with Shannon. For really any player besides LeBron and Jordan, he's fairly objective and almost always on point. But the clear double standard for someone like Jordan carrying his team versus Brunson carrying the Knicks, it's definitely present. And when it comes to the Klutch Sports narrative, the Klutch Sports agenda, what they're banking on is the audience not doing their own research and taking their word as gospel. And looking at the overall stats, again, one guy in Jordan, he was a loser, nothing without Pippen, couldn't win in the 80s, absolute trash. But Jalen Brunson, he's 0-1 Iverson carrying this team, one of the best players of all time. I mean, look at these numbers. Jordan 89 through 2 rounds. 38 points per game, 8 assists, 8 boards, on 53% shooting. In 11 games, Jordan had 1 game under 30 points, 5 40-point games, and 1 game cracking 50. And from a playmaking standpoint, out of 11 games, had 6 games with 10 or more dimes. Comparing Jordan versus Brunson's numbers straight up, both them are very impressive. But of course, Jordan's overall output was far superior. And compared to his own Bulls team, he scored 35.8% of his team's points, compared to Brunson, who's at 31.6% of the Knicks' points. And of course, no shade to Brunson, what he's doing for a 5'11" guard is fantastic and really unprecedented since Allen Iverson. But the thing about Brunson, he's an offensive player. Jordan 89 played both ends and was dominant on both ends. As look at the 89 playoffs, Michael Jordan defensively, first in defensive win shares, second in defensive plus minus, 7th in defensive rating, first in steals, and 12th in blocks, first among guards. And some might say, well, yes, Jordan was the better overall player, better on offense and defense, but Jalen's Knicks team was just way, way worse. And again, that's just not true. Look at the 89 Bulls. Scottie Pippen, 13 points per game, his second season. Bill Cartwright, 12 points per game, he was 31. Craig Hodges, 11 points per game, spot-up shooter, nothing more. Horace Grant, just like Pippen, his second season. And then John Paxson at around 6 points per game. That Bulls team at 89. No other All-NBA player, All-Defensive player, even All-Star player. What Jordan did with role players was take them to the East Finals and get 2 games off the Pistons, who in the entire playoffs only lost 2 games en route to the championship. I'm not saying Brunson's team is a god squad or a super team. I'm not saying that at all. But Josh Hart, a solid player, 18 points. At this point, a walking double-double. OG, 16 points per game. Great two-way player. DiVincenzo, 15 points per game. A good streak shooter. Hartenstein, highly underrated. And Deuce McBride, really their only player off the bench who provides any offense. My overall point of these comparisons isn't to prove Jordan's better than Brunson. That's far from it. My point of these comparisons is to show the disparity in narrative. As again, Shannon for Brunson, he's in all of him, he's carrying his team, he's Owen Iverson. But for Jordan, didn't really do anything, nothing without Pippen, couldn't win in the 80s, was a certified bum, before Bird, Magic, and Isaiah all got old. If you do any research, just take 30 minutes out of your day, look at young Michael Jordan in the playoffs. At no point in his career was he the reason his Bulls teams lost in the postseason. And more times than not, he was the sole reason the team got as far as they did. And people like Shannon Sharp, Kendrick Perkins, they'll never acknowledge Michael Jordan on the early Bulls team, their primary scorer, playmaker, and best defender by far. They'll never acknowledge that. And one more thing I do want to point out, when it comes to LeBron James and the Lakers, who will Shannon blame for the team losing? Is it LeBron James? Of course not. Shannon will go out of his way. He'll blame Anthony Davis, D'Lo, Austin Reeves, and of course, Darvin Ham. Now, what's crazy to me is that Shannon Sharp, he'll blame all those players, the supporting cast, the role players, the coach, the GM. He'll blame everybody before LeBron James. But when it comes to Jordan, early Jordan, who does he blame for the Bulls losing? Is it Pippen, who had a migraine in Game 7? Of course not. It's Jordan, it's his fault. I mean, look at this Lakers team. Anthony Davis, 28 points per game, Reeves 17, D'Lo 14, and with Rui and Prince at around 7 points per game. This Lakers team in 2024, they had talent, depth, and at least decent coaching. And comparing that to the 89 Bulls, I mean, it's not even comparable. Austin Reeves debatably was the best player on that Bulls team. And for the Lakers, he was an afterthought and a glorified scapegoat. And of course, when it comes to Klutch Sports, the Klutch Sports narrative, what do they want you to believe? It's always everyone else's fault and not LeBron James. But for Jordan, despite averaging 37 points, 8 assists, 8 boards, it is his fault. But LeBron James averaging 28 points, having Anthony Davis, Reeves, D'Lo, it's not his fault, it's the other guys not pulling their weight. That is one of the biggest double standards, the most obvious double standards in the Jordan versus LeBron debate. And one last thing I want to do, when it comes to the 1990s this season, what was one of the major themes? That era stunk, the players are garbage, Michael Jordan couldn't go left, had no jump shot, he was trash, the era was trash, and we're done with it. That was a big time narrative after the All-Star break. But here's the funny thing. Looking at the current stars in the NBA, guys who are dominating this year's playoffs, a lot of these guys, not the prototypical 2024 athlete, the strongest, the fastest, the most well-built. I mean, Jokic just yesterday won his 3rd MVP in 4 seasons. And looking at Jalen Brunson, who's probably 5'11 in heels, this dude in the playoffs is dominant. Like I said previous, I'll go more in depth with this later, looking at guys like SGA, Luka, Jokic, how those guys dominate. And the we done with the 90s crowd, they're going to be thoroughly embarrassed based off this year's playoffs. So that right there is the end of the video. And once again, Shannon Sharp, Klutch Sports. Just, the agenda never stops, the hypocrisy, double standards, they never end. So, as always, thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.